Yeah, good morning, everybody. This is Ken at Tourist Capital. We're doing the beginning of the boot camp for this is November 2019. So I always like to start with whatever we stopped at on the last one. The last board that summarized all the lessons from the last one is what I like to start with, just for continuity. So the big payoff topics last month were some of these ideas here. First, that today is a new day, and that gets to the idea that every day in the market is a new opportunity and its own thing. It's similar to other days, but there's something about it that it could be something special. So each day you have to buy your portfolio again, and you evaluate it under the new information that has come to light, man. For those of you that love The Big Lebowski. So today is a new day. And we would start at the end with the spirit of gratitude and forgiveness. Gratitude for the opportunity to do the trading that we're about to do. And forgiveness for the trading that we're about to do. Because it's going to be whatever it is, and we're not going to be perfect. And we're going to acknowledge it, but we're not going to accept it. But we are going to acknowledge that. So the difference between those two words to me feels profound. That if I accept something about myself or about the world, it's like I've made an excuse and therefore I'm willing to tolerate it. And there's a lot of things that I acknowledge and which but which I am not going to accept as the standard. You know, there's a statue over at Fort Leavenworth of General Grierson, who was the Civil War hero, Medal of Honor winner, and then voluntarily took command of the 10th Cavalry Regiment, which was the Buffalo Soldiers, the all-African-American regiment that, after the Civil War, were posted out here on the frontier at Fort Leavenworth and were charged with the mission of pacifying the Native Americans. And to be honest, in those times, what Washington, D.C. would have considered to be a success was if the Native Americans and the African American cavalry had just killed each other off completely. That would have solved a whole lot of problems, and the paleface would have been happy. So these were guys that had been freed slaves, were on the tail end of the nation, abandoned, under-resourced, but they understood what their duty was, and they performed their military mission with great distinction, and Benjamin Grierson commanded them for 22 years. 22 years. And was legendary for his commitment to racial equality, gender equality. I mean, he was a man of our times, living back then, and he didn't have to do that. He could have lived a life of ease, but he was committed to something beyond it. And so he acknowledged the state of affairs and accepted his mission, but he didn't accept the standards of the time. But he continued to work in every way that he could, and he saw his duty and he did it. And one of my favorite portraits in the office is a picture of a 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldier First Sergeant. So this is a guy who every morning had to go down and get those 100 troopers and bring discipline and order and training to these guys and care for equipment and the horses and serve the nation in an honorable way to the oath that he had sworn, and had been doing that for 30 years, you know, for $10 a month. And the portrait of this guy, you can see through the years and the decades. There's something about that sense of duty, honor, and country that he is the embodiment of, that quiet competence with the resilience to get things done. and a willingness to work towards a brighter future, acknowledging what the situation was, but not accepting it as an excuse to not do something or to whine and moan. At some point, you got to acknowledge the way things are and agree on what our better future is going to be and start working towards it from wherever you are. Or you can sit on the sidelines and complain and moan and point things out, but you're not helping the team. You're not advancing the ball. You're not pulling the wagon. So lead, follow, or get out of the way at some point. And we don't have to be perfect, and we never will be perfect, but we would say in the infantry, rock up and start marching. Put your stuff in your kit bag, in your rucksack, and start going. Let's go. And then I fast forward to World War II, and Patton breaks out from Normandy beachheads and is trying to make his dash across southern France to try to end the Nazi regime. And he's going so fast that he outruns the supply chain. And all they can do is the Red Ball Express, in which they pulled soldiers from anywhere and made them truck drivers, training or not, and told them drive as far and as fast as you can and deliver the fuel, or until the truck breaks down or until you're dead. And these guys they took the governors off the engines and were driving those things 24 hours a day, 70 miles an hour through the back roads across southern France to get it done so that we could defeat Nazi Germany. And these were primarily African American cooks and truck drivers and clerks that had been segregated in the Army but were pressed into service. And those guys just sucked it up and got it done, and the Red Ball Express was the reason why Pat was able to do what he had to do. And it wasn't until 12 years later that President Truman actually gave the order to say, shut up and desegregate the Army, and if you can't hack it, then pack it. And yet those guys just got it done. And so I read through their legacies and testimonies, and I just think about guys who came before us over the years that have done their duty, and they didn't accept what things were, but they did acknowledge what things were. And then they just figured out what needed to be done and got on with it. And so, in my view, you have to have these attitudes and habits of gratitude and forgiveness on things that matter in order to just reconcile, we're imperfect people in a perfect world or something. So one of your notes to me was, what does my daily practice and look like? All of that stuff. Well, gratitude and forgiveness is how I start the day and how I end the day before I do any of the technical work. I just pause to reflect, and so I have icons in my office where I get visual reminders of the things that matter, like the little tortoise, the 200-year time horizon, carries his kit with him. Not real fast, but that means you got to be on azimuth. You got to be on target to get your. People don't know what azimuth means anymore. There was a time when you didn't have satellites telling you exactly where you were, and you had to use a magnetic compass to figure out what your azimuth, your degree was, and then walk on a certain angle, accounting for the fact that magnetic north is not equal to true north. And so you had to know where on the planet you were, what the declination angle was, so you could adjust and translate map north into magnetic north. So to be on azimuth is to be on the pathway doing what you're doing. And in those days we had to count how many steps we were taking to determine how far we had gone. So I take 118 steps per 100 meters in most terrain, and I have that calibrated. And so even to this day, whenever I'm walking, I count my steps because I have been habituated to count steps. We used to keep just a little knotted hand line with little beads on it. As you would march 100, you'd slide one down, almost like rosary beads. And then every 10 of those is a kilometer, and then you'd have 3 guys in the platoon, each doing that independently. When they all get to 100 meters, everybody stops, and you move to the center of the triangle reset, and go. And that way you keep track of your distance and your angle, and then you can navigate. You can use the stars and the moon without GPS, and that's a lost art. So gratitude and forgiveness are part of that whole mental mindset of what it takes to be a whole person, to have persistence and resilience. More on that later. So throughout the weekend and through all the study of tortoise material, the daily debriefing is when you look at what you've done, what you've recorded, what you plan to do, what you actually did, and we categorize it into 5 things: best thing, worst thing, best takeaway, biggest surprise, and the biggest question. And whatever the best thing was, we want to do more of that. Whatever the least effective thing was, we want to figure out why was that so ineffective? What were we trying to do? What was the purpose? What got in the way? So how can we make that better? If it's something that I'm teaching, or in the way that I'm teaching, just doesn't seem to work or doesn't connect, then that's an important thing for us to discuss, because then we can figure out, well, why wasn't it effective, and what were you trying to achieve, and why did you do it that way? And that may cause a shift in perspective of what the purpose was. Like a lot of time, and if Anthony were here, we would talk about when you make that shift from direct action leader to organizational leader, it requires you to adopt different habits of mind and different paradigms. And so they might want to learn in the old way, where a sage on the stage would give them instruction and then they could just receive it and internalize it. But I make them do hands-on learning and self-teaching and peer instruction, and I observe them working on problems so that I can see, in fact, what they can do. Because it's not what I send as much as what sticks, and what sticks is what they're able to do. And so sometimes when I ask them to do that and they're not comfortable, it doesn't feel effective to them, but over time, as they start adopting the new habits. So I try to explain to them why I'm doing it in a certain way, and that can often be a source of learning. The best takeaways are things that are, products or statements or ideas that are immediately applicable. Like, got it, right away, that's where it goes, that fills a gap. And so when we talk about some of those, hey, what's a frog box and what's execution risk and all that, which is the biggest idea I've had probably in 15 years. That should fit right in and say, got it. The biggest surprise, I'll come back to that. The biggest question will be, well, okay, we'll get right to that, because unless you deal with them, you can't get to the next thing, because that's always there like a gorilla. And then the biggest surprise turns out to be interesting in the following way, that we're all successful in life. We made it here, so you can't be in this room without being successful at something. And so we've developed habits of mind that allow us to perform routine tasks routinely with just enough attention to get it done, and our mind wanders on other things. But every so often, something is said or something happens that catches us by surprise. I wasn't expecting that thing. And so when those mindful moments happen, it snaps us into the present with all of our attention. What's really happening is that our evolutionary mind has been triggered for something that was different than the rest of the environment, because we are wired to notice contrasts. Our visual system doesn't see objects so much as it sees the boundary, the border between the cup and the white background. So it's the edge that we see that creates the contrast. And so camouflage is all about taking an object and breaking up the outline so that you can't see it in contrast, whether that's in shape or a straight line or colors or whatever. And with our peripheral vision, and our visual cortex, the bifocal eyes allow us to concentrate on a thing, but then we have a wide field of vision, which is a little bit fuzzier, but our peripheral vision allows us to see motion. So I can put my hand out here and not see it, but if I wiggle my fingers a little bit, I then can see it, because it's the movement of an object against the static background that gives us the alert. And so you need to know that about your brain, that we're like raccoons in the sense that shiny objects or startling motions get our attention, they trigger us, and it creates a connection to the fight or flight syndrome or the startle reflex. And so the biological organism has certain strengths and weaknesses and behavior patterns that are hardwired in there. And many of those are not geared to help make you successful in the markets. Like the markets find ways to exploit human characteristics. I don't want to call them weaknesses, I just want to call them features. But those instinctive responses to environmental triggers are connected to our emotional center and the fight or flight syndrome. And so when you're learning things with your rational mind and it makes sense up to the top level of your brain, you will nevertheless notice things that cause you to want to act on impulse for reasons you don't even know yet, but you feel the compulsion to act. And you might even feel very confident about that because, as Dr. Burton